Once again, Muslim terrorists
have
slaughtered innocent
Islamic
people.
Extremists now control much of the country.
Their brand of justice is brutal and deadly.
Newsflash, America. These Muslim extremists are alive and well. They are not dead, and their video is not gratuitous, and it certainly is not irrelevant. It is a warning.
Welcome to the Truth About Muslims podcast, the official podcast of the Zwemer Center for Muslim Studies, where we help to educate you beyond the media. Here are your hosts, Howard and Trevor.
All right, so here's what we're going to do. We've got a lot of really good recordings from Dr. Nabeel Jabbour, and it's way too much to put into one show.
It's a good problem to have.
Yeah, so the bottom line is we had a decision to make. We could either edit it down and take out a lot of content that, you know, might be just filler, or we could break it into several shows. And after listening to it, I've just determined there's really no filler.
Right. He just has a lot of amazing things to say.
Well, I think it's just that he has been studying this. You know, this is his doctoral degree, was in looking specifically at the, you know, beginnings of Islamic fundamentalism. All of his research was done in Arabic and specifically looking at Egypt. And so this guy is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to what's happening today. And when you read his book, it's almost prophetic, the things he talks about. Wait,
so Nabeel Jabbour's, he's an expert in Islamic fundamentalism? I mean, that's his
forte. That's his forte. His doctoral dissertation is actually called "Rumbling Volcano," and it's specifically looking at what's going on Islamic fundamentalism in Egypt. And I've read it, and it's phenomenal.
Wow! And just in case you guys are wondering, like, why I don't know any of this stuff, it's because I was actually on vacation.
Yeah,
and, haven't been able to be here this week. So on these recordings, you're going to notice that I'm not there. So don't be too sad.
Yeah, I didn't kick Howard to the curb. He just didn't show up for work.
Right. I'll just be on the intros and the outros. But the cool thing is I get to listen to it as you guys listen to it, and it's kind of exciting for me because I wasn't here for the interview, so I get to just dwell on it afterward, I guess.
Well,
and talk about it
was actually really interesting, Howard. As I was listening and talking with Dr. Jabbour, I was kind of thinking, all right, what would Howard ask right about now? I didn't throw my voice or anything and try to sound like you, but I really was in my brain thinking, what would Howard say?
Yeah, what would the guy that doesn't know anything ask?
I was kind of... No, it wasn't like that. I was thinking, I think Howard's questions are much more intriguing than mine. And so when Howard asks a question, people are like, yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, what are you asking that question for? So I was trying to get inside the brain of Howard, thinking, what would Howard say?
Right.
So anyway, yeah.
I am special to the show, just... want to say that.
It was a full day though of interviews. Nabeel and I spent the whole afternoon together and just I was picking his brain, and I asked him, just, imagine that we're in a coffee shop and I'm asking you questions. Like, I just learned that this is kind of your field of expertise, and I've got a lot of questions. And so that's kind of how we did it. And he is an academic, so it was difficult to
get him to engage that way.
Right, because, I mean, if you get a professor, it's like almost like, they want to teach.
Right, lecture.
Right, and so instead it was like, okay, nope, let's have a conversation. So in the end, I think we got some really good material, so I'm excited. I'm actually excited for you to hear it, Howard.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about Nabeel, because all I know about him is his name.
Okay.
So where's he from?
Syria. He was born, I believe, in Syria. It comes from Assyrian descent, but has Lebanese nationality, and spent 15 years working and living in Egypt. Okay. And then was blacklisted, actually, in 1991, and then came to the United States, moved to Colorado Springs, and became an American citizen.
Why was he blacklisted in Egypt? What was he doing?
Well, he was working with a mission organization, and I'm not exactly sure the details of the why he was blacklisted, but that can be... I have his testimony as well that we recorded, so we'll release that at another time.
Cool, and he's a Christian.
He is. He's actually born... So it's different, right? In the Middle East, it's like they have a Christian heritage. So his parents were Presbyterian. And so he said, at one point in the interview, he said he inherited his Presbyterianism from his parents. His parents put the fear of God in him, but didn't share the gospel with him. And so you'll hear a little bit in there about his brother coming as an international student to the United States and meeting Jesus, and then him being very influential in converting him, or sharing the gospel with him, and him giving his life to Jesus.
Got it. So he's not a Muslim background believer.
No, he's an Arab Christian.
Wow. Okay. So this is a really cool take because, obviously he's Arab. He lived over there. And, yeah, man, I can't wait to hear all that he has to share.
Yeah, I don't even want to attempt the accent.
Yeah, that might be a little offensive.
But no, when he's using some of the terminology, you're just like, that's how you pronounce that word.
Right. You're like, that's official.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's one of those interesting things. When you meet an Arab Christian, it's always pretty interesting because, of course, when they pray to Allah because there's no other Arab term for God.
Oh, right.
You know what I mean? And so they have this heritage of Christianity that goes all the way, I mean, much further than you or I have. I mean, we're like first, second generation believers. He has a heritage that goes back quite a ways.
Right. And I'm sure like some of our listeners, they probably like, their hair standing on their ends because you just said that he calls God Allah, but that...
What else is he supposed to call him?
Right. He's not going to call him God.
No, it's not an Arabic word.
Right.
He speaks Arabic.
That's my mind just was blown a little bit there.
We'll do a whole show on...
We need to.
Yeah, we do.
Because that's pretty controversial right now.
Yeah. Well, actually, we were talking before the interview, and we were talking about how one of the Bible translations that's in Arabic, somebody recently has changed it and put the article in there instead of... So they changed it basically from Allah to the Allah to make a differentiation.
To distinguish.
Yeah. And he said, how would you feel if somebody took the liberty of changing your NIV Bible to the God? And I was like, whoa.
The God.
Yeah. The God so loved the world that he gave as well. You know what I mean?
It is interesting because in one sense it makes, obviously it makes it very specific, but it also kind of allows for all these other gods, right? Because you're talking about the God. Whereas in our text, it's more like God, the only God.
Right. Big G,
right.
Little G. No,
right.
I think
right.
more the point was, here's an outsider coming and deciding for you what the proper terminology is.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That would be tough.
And so this was, I can't remember the context in which this happened, but yeah. Anyway, so that's, he comes from a very interesting perspective, and he's written a few books. One of my favorites is actually Cross Through, make sure I got this right, because there's a couple with the title similar, The Crescent Through the Eyes of the Cross.
Oh, right.
And that's all about worldview and Muslim worldview. And so if you're kind of wondering, why is it that it seems like the Muslim world views it this way, that book really unpacks it. And I think that's one of my favorite books because it kind of gives you insights into how Muslims might view certain events.
Right.
Yeah. So anywho, it was a good day, good interviews, but it's way too long to put into one podcast. So we're going to break it into 4 sections. And the very first section, which you guys are about to listen to, is all about the connections with how all of this begins in, believe it or not, Colorado.
You just said Islamic fundamentalism and Colorado.
Yeah, they go together. It's bizarre, and I don't think a lot of people know this, but there is a strong connection with the United States, an international student sent to Colorado, and the sort of cradle of Islamic ideology that we now see being played out today. So that's what this first episode is going to be about.
All right, let's listen to it.
One of the big figures in Islamic fundamentalism is a man from Egypt. His name is Sayyid Qutb. If you really want to understand Islamic fundamentalism, Sayyid Qutb is a key figure.
How come we don't hear about Sayyid Qutb? Am I saying that right? It sounds much better when you say it. Say it again.
Sayyid Qutb.
Okay, and so you're saying in order to understand fundamentalism, we need to understand this man's life.
Yes,
right.
That is right.
So tell me a little bit about his life.
Well, he was born in 1906 in Egypt. He went to a Quranic school where they memorize the Quran and study, basically. It's like a religious school.
Is that pretty common for students at that point in time in Egypt to go?
It used to be common, now not common anymore. It still exists in other countries such as Pakistan, But in Egypt, it's not widespread.
And did Sayyid Qutb memorize the Quran?
Yes, by the age of 12, he memorized the Quran. Quran is almost as large as the New Testament.
Wow.
Many people compete on TV in Egypt by memorizing the Quran, and they get checked and they get prizes, etc.
So what exactly about this guy's life makes him so much of a key leader in this movement?
Well, when he finished his primary education, he went to public schools. And then when he graduated from high school, he went to Teachers College. And he graduated from there and was appointed as a teacher in government schools in the city of Cairo. And with time, the government recognized that he is very sharp. So they gave him a scholarship. Before that, he was appointed as an inspector of government schools.
So he was an educator?
Yeah.
Okay.
So later on, he was sent to the United States with a unique scholarship. Basically, they wanted him to go with two goals. Number one is they wanted him to get polished or get westernized. Secondly, they wanted him to get exposed to the public schools in America so that he will come back to Egypt and reform the educational system in Egypt.
So at this point in time, does Egypt really value the way that the West is doing things?
Very much so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He got on a boat in Alexandria coming to the States through Europe. And within hours, he panicked with a thought. If I couldn't survive as a Muslim in Egypt, because during his secondary years and university years, he became a secular Muslim. He thought, if I couldn't live as a victorious Muslim in Egypt, where about 90% of the population are Muslims, how can I survive as a Muslim in America?
It's a really good question.
Yeah. So he went to his cabin in the ship and got in he had packed a small copy of the Quran in his case. He got it, and he had forgotten most of what he used to know by memory and started to read. The more he read, the more he wanted to pray. With time, he started gaining courage to approach other Muslims on the ship. And he'll ask them, where are you going? They'll say, to Paris or to London. And he'll say, how's your walk with God? They'll say, half-half. He'll say, if it was half-half in Egypt, how can you survive in London or Paris? And one by one to his cabin, read together from the Quran and pray together. One night he was in his cabin. All of a sudden, a beautiful young lady barged in, a European woman who was most probably half drunk. She looked in and she said, I like to sleep in this cabin. He was shocked. Can you imagine somebody who had never traveled outside his country having this situation? He said, what do you mean? There's only one bed. She said, one bed is enough for two. He got her out of his cabin, closed the door, knelt down and started to pray. So he came to America with his antennas up. That's how his trip started coming to the West.
It's amazing to think that the religious fervor started even before arriving, that he knew he had to be on guard.
That is right.
Before he arrived.
That's right.
All right, so that is definitely relevant to the story. So what happens when he gets to the United States?
The first place he arrived to was New York City. Now, it was 1948. This is right after the Second World War. What really was a shock to his system was materialism. He was amazed. What people are talking about are money and what they are buying with their money. All they talked about their cars, their houses. And he wrote a letter to one of his friends back in Egypt. He said, I long to meet an American with whom I can discuss real issues in life.
That's really sad. Yeah. Approximately how old is he at this point in his life? Is he in his 30s?
He was born in 1906, and in 1948 he went to the States, so he was about 42 years old.
Wow. And so he's just desiring to have a relationship. That's right, 42.
42, yeah.
So he's just desiring to have a relationship of some substance when he comes to the United States and he can't find one.
He longed to have a meaningful discussion about real issues in life. And it's said that the people he met were materialistic people. My brother, on the other hand, came to the States in 1950s to study for his master's in engineering. While in America, he came to know Christ. Now, my parents put the fear of God in us. I come from a Presbyterian background. My parents put the fear of God in us, but they didn't know how to share the gospel with us. So my brother met the right kind of Americans in America, and he came to know Christ. He went back to the Middle East, and he was the primary instrument in my coming to know Christ. I am so glad that my brother came as an international student to the States. I am sad that Sayyid Qutb came as an international student to the States. I wish he never came.
This is a really interesting way of looking at it. We have two very different paths, two very different trajectories going forward, and it all comes down to who these people encounter.
Yeah.
So who did Sayyid Qutb encounter while he was here, and how did that affect him going forward?
Okay, so we talked about New York, and the encounter was with people who all they cared about is money, and he came to the conclusion that the real God in America is the dollar. Then he moved to D.C. to study English, to improve his... He knew the English language to some extent, but he needed to improve it so that he can enroll at a university in Greeley, Colorado. So the stage of improving his English was in D.C. And during that time, he had to have a surgery, the tonsillectomy, removing his tonsils. And while he was recovering in his room, which was next to a room where nurses and doctors had their coffee breaks, and as he was in his room recovering from the surgery, he heard screaming of joy. And so he started asking, what happened? What happened? One of the nurses went to his room and told him great news. He said, what's the great news? He said, Hassan al-Banna was assassinated.
Okay, so who is Hassan al-Banna?
Hassan al-Banna was another person, another prominent leader of Islamic fundamentalism. He also was born in 1906 in Egypt. He also went to a Quranic school. He also, by the age of 12, memorized the whole of the Quran. But unlike Sayyid Qutb, in his high school days, he sought committed Muslims to fellowship with. He met some mystic Muslims. He joined them for a while. They focused on their relationship with God, and they didn't do any evangelism, so he got disillusioned with them and left them. Then he went to Teachers College, not the same time like Sayyid Qutb, so they didn't know one another at that time. And in 1928, he graduated and went to a city called Ismailiyah in Egypt, where he started the Muslim Brotherhood.
And what was the point behind the Muslim Brotherhood? What was he really trying to establish with this group?
It's a good question. He wanted to become a teacher because he wanted to influence the new generations. So from day one, he started influencing his students. In the evening, in those days, there were no televisions. So in the evenings, he'll go to cafes where men sit and drink tea and smoke the hookah. And so he will join them and drink tea with them and ask them important questions, such as, why do we have so many problems in Egypt? And he helps them to come to the conclusion, we have forsaken God and we're living with the consequences. In 1933, he started a movement which came to be known as the Muslim Brotherhood. This movement became the trunk of the tree out of which most of the branches of Islamic fundamentalism came from. It is a very important movement, and recently They took control of the government for a year and a portion of another year in Egypt when Mohammed Morsi became the president of Egypt.
So the Muslim Brotherhood has been around for a while.
Yes, since 1933.
And they've had a pretty large following in Egypt, it seems like.
Very much so.
And so what is the relationship between Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb? Like, how did they
didn't
meet?
know one another.
Okay.
But he became a hero for Sayyid Qutb. So Sayyid Qutb was shocked by the response of this nurse who said, "Great news, Hassan al-Banna got assassinated." He thought, why do Americans create caricatures of great men and make it justifiable to hate them?
I mean, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that Hassan al-Banna, when he's creating the Muslim Brotherhood, do you think he had in mind some of the radicalization that we see today, or do you think he really just wanted to have a fundamentalist movement back to making Egypt more Islamic?
I think it was more Islamic, but with time Hassan al-Banna got involved in politics, and as a result he lived with the consequences and got assassinated for it.
So the show wouldn't be possible without sponsors.
And this week's sponsors are
Zwemer Center.
Zwemer Center.
Zwemer Center.
The Zwemer Center. Zwemer Center.
And what does the Zwemer Center do?
Talks about Muslims and tells them on the computer that we love you.
Very nice.
The Zwemer Center equips the church to reach Muslims.
The Zwemer Center has been educating people about reaching Muslims before it was cool.
You know, something important I need to say about Sayyid Qutb. It's not only the assassination of Hassan al-Banna that really made a permanent difference in her life. Even far more was the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. And the government in the United States recognized it right away. This time, he was really shocked. He thought, from what he knew about the Bible and about Christians, that Christians are supposed to practice justice. He thought, why is it when it comes to Israel, Christians forget about justice and stand with Israel no matter what? He crossed the line.
So was he in the United States when this happened?
Yeah.
So he has the encounter with the woman on the boat. He experiences the materialism in New York City. And then while in Washington, D.C., he sees the politics of the establishment of Israel and the assassination
The establishment of Israel is 1948. But before that, there was preparation for it. And he was at that time in Egypt, and sometime while he was in the States, Israel was established as a state.
Yeah, so you can see how going with the defenses there, and then seeing what he experiences. Okay, so let's go forward from the assassination of Hassan al-Banna, the nurse's reaction. What's next for Sayyid Qutb?
After D.C., he went to Greeley, Colorado, where there is a famous program on education, and that's why he went to Greeley. And Greeley at that time was a rural area in comparison with what he saw in New York and D.C.
I can imagine.
And he thought, finally I found the America that I've been looking for. He didn't hear about the partying on Friday nights and Saturday nights that took place outside of campus. So in Greeley, he had various experiences. One major experience he had was with a football player who was African American. And he was by far the most important player on the football team in that university. And can you believe it that African American didn't have a Caucasian friend, an American white friend?
Yeah, this is the 1950s, I can imagine.
Yeah, and that's 1949.
1949, yeah.
And, you know, the only group that accepted him were foreign students. So he joined the Foreign Students Club, the International Students Club at the university. If he wanted to have a haircut, he didn't find one barber in Greeley who would offer him to cut his hair. So he'll have to drive all the way to Denver to have a haircut. A very important experience that Sayyid Qutb had. One time, along with this football player, went together to the movies. When they arrived to the theater, the man at the door looked at them. Now, Sayyid Qutb is a little bit dark, but not like the African-American guy. So he looked at them and he said, "You can't go in." So Sayyid Qutb said, "Why not?" He said, "You are the N-word." So he said, "What do you mean? I am Egyptian." He said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know. You can go in, but not him."
So
he said, "I won't go in either."
Wow.
So he was shocked by materialism. He was shocked by the Christians and lack of justice. Then he was shocked by racism in America.
Did he have any encounters with Christians while he was in Greenlee?
There is a story about him. Actually, recently I taught a course at a seminary in Colorado Springs, and one of my students comes from Greeley. She told me about the church that he went to, that Sayyid Qutb went to. It seems on the weekend the cafeteria and the university was closed. So the students, especially the international students, were trying to save money by eating wherever they can have food. So it looks like on Sundays one of the churches has a potluck lunch. And he went to that church. And there was a dancing party at the church, and
you can imagine coming from Egypt, that this would not have been something that he would have found appropriate.
Went to a different church.
Yeah. Wow. So how does he fit into the picture?
He had short time in California after Greeley, and then went back to Egypt, determined to join the Muslim Brotherhood.
All right, this week's sponsors.
CIU.
CIU.
CIU educates people from a biblical world review.
Worldview.
Can't say.
CIU educates people from a biblical worldview to impact the nations with the message of Christ.
He went back to Egypt as a committed Muslim fundamentalist and joined the Muslim Brotherhood. In 1954, the Muslim Brotherhood were accused for an attempt to assassinate President Gamal Abdel Nasser, and Sayyid Qutb was arrested and he got imprisoned, back and forth for about 10 years. But because he had so many sicknesses, he was moving from the prison to the hospital of the prison and back to the prison, back and forth between the prison and the hospital. During his imprisonment time, he wrote a complete commentary on the Quran. It's called In the Shade of the Quran. And that commentary is extremely influential in shaping the minds of Muslim fundamentalists. For instance, the brother of Sayyid Qutb, his name is Muhammad Qutb, ended up becoming a professor at Jeddah University in Saudi Arabia. Osama bin Laden was a student at that university. He didn't take courses from Muhammad Qutb, the brother of Sayyid Qutb, but Muhammad Qutb was asked to give a lecture once a month to the student body, voluntary lecture for the students. And Osama bin Laden attended these lectures. He was at crossroads in his life at that time. And as a result of the influence of Muhammad Qutb, Osama bin Laden took the road that he has chosen.
It's amazing that the connection with being in the United States, and I can't help but wonder, what if he had had a similar experience like your brother?
Yeah.
how different the world would be today.
That
Because
is right.
this guy is
That is right.
at the very core of everything happening today. Is this guy who
Yeah.
came as an international student to the
Yeah.
United States?
Yeah.
So, are his ideas at this point radical, or are his ideas reform? How would you describe Sayyid Qutb at this point in
He
his
wrote
ideas?
about militancy, but he himself did not practice it. You know, violence escalates. Hassan al-Banna wrote certain things. Sayyid Qutb took them further. He emphasized the takfir principle, which is the good guys versus the bad guys. By the way, let me go back as a background to this takfir principle. While he was in the prison hospital at one time, there was a rebellion that took place in the prison, and the police were so savage in the way they treated the prisoners, and many prisoners were taken as wounded people to that hospital. When he saw how these Muslim policemen or prison guards were treating the people, he was
Fellow Muslims.
Yeah, fellow Muslims. He thought, how could Muslims treat fellow Muslims this way? So that's when he followed a principle that was introduced by somebody called Ibn Taymiyyah, which is called the takfir principle, which basically drawing two circles, the good guys versus the bad guys. So even Muslims can be bad guys and they can be considered the enemy. And during his time of imprisonment, he did not only write a commentary on the Quran, several volumes, he wrote a book called Milestones, which is extremely important. I used to have it as a required reading at all the seminaries where I taught.
What exactly is takfir? What does it mean?
Takfir means declaring somebody as kafir. In other words, a person who is not a believer.
Okay, so it's saying they're no longer in the faith.
Yeah.
And so it's him seeing Muslims treating other Muslims with such brutality that he has to make the decision they can't be Muslims.
That's
or
right.
they wouldn't be doing it.
That's right.
And this is the same principle that we're seeing played out today in a lot of the radical movements, where radical Muslims are killing fellow Muslims because they're takfir.
That's right.
They're not Muslims anyway.
Yeah.
Wow.
Basically, they excommunicate them from the circle of the faith.
So what exactly did he write in this book, Milestones?
In this book, by the way he wrote it, he'll have it smuggled out one chapter at a time, and basically he wrote about his convictions based on his experiences in America.
Wow.
It's a short book. It can be downloaded free on the internet. It was smuggled out of prison, one chapter at a time. And when finally all the book was smuggled out, they got it published. Right away it got sold out. Then they reprinted. Then it got sold out. Several reprints. Then the government realized there's something important about this book. They read it and they found it's dangerous. So they banned it.
What did they find so dangerous?
Because basically he was critical of Muslims unless they were photocopies of Muslim fundamentalists. And the government in Egypt was trying to emphasize socialism and pan-Arabism. For him, they were not real Muslims. So he was perceived as an enemy of the government.
And does he outline and describe how Muslims are to correct this problem in the book?
Yes. He basically is saying that they should go back to the fundamentals of the faith, going back to original Islam at the time of Muhammad, because the Islam that exists today is a corrupted form of Islam.
He uses that term Jahiliyyah, doesn't he, in that book, referencing that America was like a pre-Islamic...
Jahiliyyah
is
the term. Yeah.
Right. Almost so like barbaric.
Barbaric. It's like the time, according to Muslim historians, they refer to the time before Muhammad as the barbaric time or al-Jahiliyyah. So he refers to the government and the Islam which was practiced in Egypt as a form of Jahiliyyah or barbaric religion.
And did he see that, I'm assuming because Egypt was sending him to the United States to study education, and they really valued the way the West was doing things, I'm sure he came back to Egypt with the desire to protect Egypt from becoming like the West.
Basically, he was against modernity. He believed that modernity is ruining Islam. Yeah.
So how does he fit, I mean, how does the story conclude with Sayyid?
Well, something important about the book. When finally the book was banned, the government knew that this man is very dangerous, and the court sentenced him to hanging. But they didn't want to hang him because they were afraid he'll become a martyr and become a saint among the Muslim fundamentalists. So they sent him Sadat, who was in the government but was not the president. The president was Nasser. So Sadat went to visited him in prison and pleaded to him to recant. He refused, because if he recanted, they wouldn't have hanged him. Then they sent him his sister, the sister of Sayyid Qutb. She pleaded to him. She said, just recant and they will set you free. They promised me that they'll set you free. You can go to a country in the Gulf such as Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or somewhere in the Gulf countries, and you can write as many books as you want. He said, if I recant, whatever I write will be of no value. So he refused to recant, and in 1966 he got hanged. At that time, Egypt government thought we eradicated Islamic fundamentalism. I read so many books written by Muslim fundamentalists that I came to the conclusion nobody can eradicate Islamic fundamentalism. Excuse me for using this analogy. We can eradicate a generation of mosquitoes, but unless we identify the swamps and address them every few years, we have to wage with a new war against a new generation of mosquitoes. And what scares me is that every new generation will be tougher to deal with.
Is it fair to make the comparison that in some ways Sayyid Qutb became a martyr for Islamic fundamentalism?
Definitely.
And so, in the same way that we would say the blood of the martyr is the seed of the church, it is the spreading of the gospel. Do Islamic fundamentalists see some of these guys as martyrs? Bin Laden, Sayyid Qutb.
Muslims believe Islam is a tree that gets nourished from the blood of the martyrs.
All right, so this show wouldn't be possible without sponsors.
And at this point in the show is where, if you want to partner with us, we would put your ad. So if you want to be a part of the show, you want to partner with us,
You like what we're doing.
you want to be on our team, what have you,
Bring this show to the world.
then email us and let us know.
All right, just got done listening to Nabeel Jabbour. That was amazing. Just to kind of know the backstory, I think, is so fascinating, especially with all the stuff that we're inundated with on the news today. It's kind of neat to kind of hear how everything kind of started.
Yeah, I don't know that a lot of people realize that there's a connection with this guy coming to the United States as an international student.
Right. We kind of heard like a little bit of the backstory of Osama bin Laden, and I think that made it more fascinating. But this here kind of like even going before Osama, right? And before a lot of this stuff had happened, it's kind of neat to hear like the very, very beginnings. Mm-hmm. And so, but there's a few questions that I'm sure that everyone else is wondering that's not in the know. He throws around terms like the Brotherhood and Al Qaeda, and so like, is there anything like really simple a way to understand who the Brotherhood and who Al Qaeda is and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think he makes the comment, and he says this in his book as well, that the Muslim Brotherhood is the trunk of which all the branches of Islamic fundamentalism have come. So he would make the case that the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna, had basically started this group in order to kind of protect Egypt from becoming westernized. Because if you look back at the time when Hassan al-Banna does all this, this is the time at which there's a significant battle going on for what the Middle East is going to look like. And the United States is very involved in sort of kind of trying to set up democracies and sort of a secular government in all of these different places. And so Hassan al-Banna's goal with the Muslim Brotherhood is to keep it from becoming westernized.
And so it's multinational. It's not just Egypt.
Well, no, it is just Egypt at that point. At that point, the Muslim Brotherhood is purely Egyptian.
And this is the 50s?
The Muslim Brotherhood goes back even further to the 30s, I believe. Maybe it's 1933, I believe, is the beginnings of that.
But in the 1900s, this decade. So, well, we're not in 1900s, but you know what I'm saying.
Right, yeah, 20th century. This is when all this is going on.
That's so interesting. So, like Nabeel Jabbour just gives us a snapshot into kind of how these thoughts have just kind of exploded from this one guy's mind.
Yeah, well, that's the really neat. Well, I say neat. It's not very neat.
Interesting.
That's the interesting point. That when Sayyid Qutb comes back to Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood is going, and they really need. Sayyid Qutb isn't the charismatic leader; he's the theological mind.
So he's kind of like give me the reasons from the Quran,
right,
that we can do this,
right. And this gives a whole new level of importance to international student ministry, right.
Right, yeah, and that's what I was thinking. I'm like, and you guys kind of touched on it too. Like, how different would it have been if his experience was much like Nabeel Jabbour's brother?
Oh, no. When he said that, when he was sharing that story, talking about how his brother came to America, and he's so thankful because his brother met Jesus, and the
effects thereof.
Yes,
I mean, Nabeel Jabbour,
ripple effect.
Right? Nabeel Jabbour is writing all of these books, helping us to understand Islam and reaching Muslims and things like that, and that wouldn't have happened if his brother had had the same experience that Qutb had. Right.
No, his experience is not a good one. And I think the saddest one was the experience he had with the Christians. He does write. Sayyid Qutb has written more than just Milestones. He's written a lot of different things, and a lot of it is about his experience in America, which is becoming really popularized right now by Muslims.
You mean other people are reading it because of...
You can get it online. It's free. It's accessible, PDF format, and you can read about... And it's being translated from the Arabic to English so that people can see. And he writes extensively on his experiences in America, what he sees.
You know what I find that's really interesting is that we've been talking about how Muslims are coming to know the Lord simply because of looking at fundamentalism and seeing, wow, like if that's what Islam is, I'm not really sure if I want to be a part of Islam any longer. But here, on the same sense, but on the opposite extreme, Qutb comes to the States, and he's not a strong Muslim at this point, and then he sees this immorality, right, in American culture and the way we live, the way we do things, and he's thinking to himself, if this is the way the West is, this is the way modernization is, if this is the direction that it's going to take us, then I don't want to have anything to do with it. And it drives him back to, fundamental Islam, right?
Well, that's that term that we use, that Jahiliyyah term, that idea that before Muhammad came, before the Arabs had a prophet, that they were in sort of a barbaric state.
Right.
They were backwards. Everything was just barbaric. They were burying people in the sand. It was just chaos. And Sayyid Qutb uses that term when he describes the United States and says that while they seem to be advancing in modernity, they seem to be advancing in medicine and science and all of the latest industry and engineering and education. That's what he was sent here to study, education. He was supposed to go back to Egypt and become in charge of the education ministry in Egypt to make it like the United States.
Yeah.
Instead, he sees it all and says, while they think they're moving forward, they're actually going backwards because they're spiritually bankrupt.
Yeah, and that's so interesting because, sometimes we think, the way Muslims think is so backwards, because it's so counterintuitive to what we think in our worldview.
That's interesting.
Modernization is so important for us, and technological advances, and I've known there's people writing and articles being written about is technology good for us, but here in the 50s, right? This gentleman has this experience, and he just. From that point on, the way he writes, it's so affected him that now he's influencing millions of Muslims to go back to the way pre-modernity for Muslims.
That's right.
And so when you look at ISIS, you're just like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. Why would they want to go back? And then you remember, like, we were talking, I think, in this podcast about slavery, how they're going back to owning slaves, saying that that's okay because that's how it was in Muhammad's day. And it's just so interesting to see now how they got to that conclusion, like why it would be better to go backwards, because we think in those terms back in the day, like we were so ignorant, we didn't understand, we didn't have the conveniences and the comforts. And here he's saying, no, that's all leading you to immorality, barbarianism.
Right. That was his big thing, is especially that particular meeting he has at the church.
Right, with the dance.
Yeah, there's a dance.
Okay, but
on the gramophone, they're playing "Baby, It's Cold Outside."
Right.
The room is filled with lust. I mean, he writes about all of this, and it's like the chest of the men and the chest of the women were meeting together. The minister's dimming the lights, and everybody's dancing. And he actually makes the minister out to be like a matchmaker.
Interesting. And this is what's weird, is it's in the 50s.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that the 50s were like where like a lot of churches maybe were doing this.
This would have been a pretty liberal experience for a church in the 50s, I think.
Right. So it's like I'm not saying it's chance, but like it is like not common. Like I would always see in clips. I don't even know. Like just like whenever I heard this kind of stuff, there'd be like chaperones. They'd be like, "Leave room for the Holy Spirit."
That's right. Put a balloon there. Room for the Holy Spirit. I think it's in a movie somewhere.
Right. Or they wouldn't have dances at all. They'd be like, "No way, we're going to have dances." But here he goes to a church because he wants food. Right, where all his college friends, they're hungry. They're college students, and they go to a church for a potluck, and then there's a dance.
Yeah.
And and I'm assuming that you heard that they're playing "Baby, It's Cold Outside" from the book,
gramophone,
from the book,
right?
Yeah. So like, wow, he even mentions the song.
He even breaks the song down about what it means.
Right, and the song is kind of seductive. Like when I hear it, I'm just like, oh.
Sorry, took the opportunity to sing a line.
Right. But yeah, so I mean, I'm so grieved that his whole experience, and then of course racism, and this is Colorado.
Yeah, imagine if he had gone to South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama.
Right.
This is Colorado,
that would be totally different. And I did find it interesting that when he said he's an Egyptian, the guy said, "I'm sorry."
Yeah, sorry, you can come in.
You can come in. Yeah, which is really interesting to see just that paradigm there at that time. But that's sad, especially the boat. That was a really weird one.
Oh, encountering the
woman,
European
half drunk woman, right, wanting to sleep in the same bed. She doesn't know this guy,
and he says it's at that moment where he's really questioning if he has what it takes. Do I have what it takes to maintain my Muslim faith while in America? And then he encounters this woman,
right? And if you consider like in like an alternative universe, what if it was a woman that just had caught his eye and that he felt attraction for, and it happened, more naturally in the West kind of way. Maybe it would have been a totally different story. But because she was so blatant,
right?
Not being concerned at all about the fact that she was a woman. Oh, and that she was half inebriated. I don't know what half means, but
yeah,
that still must have been shocking for a Muslim that had just come from Egypt. No matter how secular he was,
right? Yeah.
Right, and then experiencing that how much must have been such culture shock.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. There's a fair amount of culture shock, immorality, and then also there's a lot of political things going on with the United States and Egypt, with the Muslim Brotherhood, with political powers in Egypt. And all of this, like I mentioned with Nabeel, is a perfect storm.
It is. And it there says a lot, because, whenever Nabeel Jabbour is talking about him in the very beginning, he just sounds like a man that's very real about himself, a young man trying to figure out, okay, what do I believe? What do I not believe? Am I really a Muslim? Am I not a Muslim? He's just kind of on that fence. But by the end of his life, when his sister's begging for him to recant, his belief system is so solidified that he's like, if I wrote anything else and I recanted, then my words would mean nothing.
Well, he had suffered quite a bit at that point, being in prison, being tortured. Yeah, hospital
constantly, but he's still writing, and his belief system has so solidified that he would not even recant to save his own life.
Nope.
And so therefore he gets hanged, which is so fascinating, because I don't know, in the U.S. We've been doing lethal injections, if that, but then here we have an old-fashioned hanging.
Yeah, and this is 1966,
right?
I believe.
So this is a hanging, and he gets hanged and he knew he was going to be hanged,
right?
Because he believed so much, and even just the demonizing idea of the West, of the modernity, moving that direction, that he wanted to protect his people
Well, what did you think about this idea of takfir, that concept of declaring someone to be non-Muslim? Did it make sense, the way he was explaining it, that Sayyid Qutb needed to kind of have this as an ability to be able to justify why these people were doing what they were doing to him when he was being beaten by fellow Muslims in prison and tortured? He needed to justify that they can't be Muslims because they shouldn't be doing something like that to me as a Muslim.
Right. You know what I found that was really interesting about that was that, he goes to the West and he can see that they're the enemy. Like in his mind, they're immoral. They're just a bad people overall. He has very little good experience as far as his faith is concerned in America. Right. So I can see how he can, just be like, no, they're bad. But then he comes back to Egypt, and then all of a sudden he's dealt with the same kind of thing. So what is he going to do? He says, well, they're Muslims. So his only option is to either to say, oh, we're all bad.
Right. And he sees that the Egyptians are like, oh man, that's what we want.
Right.
We want westernization. They're watching Western movies. Yeah. They're getting a Western leader. They're getting, all of this. Yeah. Yeah.
And so he has a decision to make. He's saying either the West is wrong and we're wrong as well, or he has to say, no, the West is wrong. And these Muslims that are doing all these bad things, wanting the bad things, they have to be wrong too. So I'm not going to consider them Muslim.
That's right.
And then therefore he has to interpret the Quran in a way that supports
that
his
justifies
view.
It. Yeah.
Exactly. And then that comes out into
the book Milestones.
Right.
When you read Milestones, the jihad is always supposed to first and foremost be fought against your own Muslim society.
Wow. Okay. So how does
overthrow these Muslim governments, because they are legislating Muslim people, but they're not legislating through the Sharia.
Right, which is why, again, this is another connection to modern day fundamentalism, is that why Sharia law is becoming so popular in some of these countries that are embracing fundamentalism.
Yep, because he's saying, if this is a Muslim people, and we are Muslim people, this is a Muslim country, then the only people capable of legislating are Muslims.
And true Muslims.
True Muslims,
under
not the
true Muslim law.
Muslims, not the kafir, as he said, that the true Muslims legislation by God through Muslims.
Right.
And that's why the jihad first has to be fought against secular Muslim governments, and that's why he was eventually hanged.
Right. And I can't help but wonder if the government had just decided to let him go, what would have happened?
Oh, I don't think he would have been nearly as influential. I think the death, like we mentioned in the podcast, his death was considered martyrdom. And I think that's what's key about next week's episode, is that there is a young man that is right there, present.
What do you mean? Literally there?
Well, the lawyer, and this will be in next week's episode, the lawyer of Sayyid Qutb is the uncle of Ayman al-Zawahiri, who is the current leader of Al-Qaeda. Whoa. And mastermind behind 9/11. There's a connection here. This is all going to make sense after 4 episodes.
Interesting. So you're saying that there's this web that begins with Qutb and takes us all the way to where we are now.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, I cannot wait to hear the next set of episodes, man.
Yeah, good stuff.
Well, that's it for this week. Thank you guys so much for listening. We really thank Nabeel, Jabbour. How long did you guys record? 4 hours, you said?
We got about 3.5 hours in, so I think we're going to break it down to probably 4 episodes, 30 minutes each. So we got some editing to do, but it's good stuff.
Yeah. So thank you again for listening, all you listeners out there. And please put our name out there. Like, you know what we're finding? We're finding that a lot of people don't know how to listen to podcasts.
Yeah, I'm shocked. You know what? I'm just going to go ahead and say, Howard was talking about technology. I've got an old school phone, but I still listen to podcasts on my iPod. I actually have an iPod.
Yeah,
I dug it out of a drawer so that I could download podcasts because I like podcasts.
That's cute.
I've gotten rid of the iPhone.
But you know, take the time, like just, you know, like sell people on the idea of podcasts, because we think it's such a cool way to get the information out there. And so if you're listening and you like the show, also review on iTunes. You can subscribe there or on our Podomatic website.
Yeah, we're up to 5 reviews.
Right, and they're all 5 stars.
All right.
And they weren't written by me or Trevor.
Actually, I asked Howard that. I was like, I'm going to go write us a review. He said, it's going to say your name. And I'm going to be like, that's right. And I'm going to say it's me.
And I'm going to say I'm awesome.
I like us.
But anyway, so again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, be sure to tune in next week for part 2.